Good afternoon, and welcome to all of our GovCon warriors out there to the March edition of the GovCon HR Roundup podcast. Where we were joking, where March Madness has its own kind of connotation.
Did you say March or Musk?
March
Madness. Okay,
Madness. Very different meaning for many of our listeners out there. But welcome back. Glad to be with you again today. My name is Joe Young. I am the president of GovCon Pay. We are the only outsourced payroll and HR solutions provider firmly dedicated to serving the government contracting marketplace. I'm going to do one shameless plug. I haven't done this before.
Do it up.
This is really more for my marketing team.
Yes.
So when I say we're the only outsource, we got our first piece of business just recently. Somebody found us by putting in government contracting payroll HR into ChatGPT.
And you all came up.
And we came up.
That's awesome.
So thank you again to my marketing team, but I'm going to shout them out. But hey, we were part of a large language model.
That is good.
That's right. Wasn't a goal when we founded it, but things change. So very excited about that. But as always, we are coming to you live from Tyson's Corner, Virginia, here in the studios of BLC Digital Strategies, the media affiliate of Berenzweig Leonard LLP, and with the support, as always, of our wonderful producer, Mr. Todd Castleberry. Before we get started, I also want to recognize our great sponsor, the folks from Berkshire Associates. For those you don't know, Berkshire HR compliance experts for over 50 years. Experience providing compliance services and technology for organizations looking to build the ideal workforce through compliant non-discrimination services, workforce analytics, and pay equity. As has been a lot of the topic, the things that they work a lot on, we're going to be covering again today. So welcome to all the folks, clients, and folks in Berkshire who are joining us. And for those of you who are loyal listeners to the podcast, you will see we have a fresh new face joining us today. So very glad to have, along with managing partner.
I'm a fresh face too.
You're fresh, not as fresh. But Nick Johnson, partner with Berenzweig Leonard, sitting in for Seth today. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself to our
Joe.
listeners?
Thanks for the intro. I'm honored to be here. You guys have put on some great videos in the past, and so looking forward to a really good discussion here. Nick Johnson, I'm a partner with Berenzweig Leonard, work in our firm's employment practice, work closely with Declan on a lot of fun activities that have been keeping us busy the start of this year.
And I'm Declan Leonard, managing partner here at Berenzweig Leonard, where I also head up our firm's employment law practice. And I will say this much, usually Seth Berenzweig is occupying that seat. We miss him. I saw him walking around the hallway. He didn't know what to do with his time, but we're happy to have Nick in, and Seth will be back soon enough, yes.
Well, we'll see how Nick does.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
All right, here we go.
All right, before we dive in, I do want to remind all of our listeners today, if you do have any questions as we're going through the program today, please put them in the chat. Our team is monitoring that. We will try and adjust those during the program or at the end if there's anything that comes up that you'd really like some support from us. So what are we going to do today? We haven't been promoting topics because of the changing landscape that we've all been involved in. So we're going to be kind of going back to some things. So today we're going to focus on DEI Revisited, some of the agency funding cuts, their impacts, and also there's new executive orders, so we seem like we're talking about executive orders ever since our episode in January. So to get things kicked off, Declan, in January episode, DEI was all the talk. We were 2 days after the inauguration we were in here, which was exciting. It was an exciting Thursday for everybody. And then it seemed to quiet down in February, and now we're back talking about DEI in March. Why is that circling back?
Yeah, so what happened, obviously, in January, the Trump administration imposed the executive order banning DEI. And as with many of these Trump executive orders, frankly, most of them, they were subject to court challenge. And a Maryland federal judge imposed an injunction on that ban, basically saying you can't ban DEI. Well, that quickly made its way up to the Court of Appeals. In this particular case, it's the Fourth Circuit that governs us. And they lifted that ban. They reinstated the Trump ban. They lifted the injunction and reinstated the Trump ban. So on DEI. So as of right now, as of when we're recording this,
check my phone.
There is the Trump ban on DEI is absolutely in effect. And so that's why we're back talking about it. It's going to take up a lot of our discussion today, but we are going to hit some of the other executive orders too, as you noted.
And Declan, just one thing to add, I thought that it's kind of relevant to some developments that we're seeing on the federal agency level is one of the arguments in that legal challenge was that no one really defined what illegal DEI is.
Yeah.
And it was challenged on a vagueness argument.
Yep.
And obviously, as you noted, the federal court struck down 3 components of it. And one of the reasons why was because it was not defined. And what I find interesting is now you're starting to see some guidance and some technical assistance come out from these agencies elaborating on what illegal DEI means, which is really important for government contractors, because that's what you need to look to when you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I need to correct this? What do I need to do to kind of address and comply with these executive orders?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the things is this isn't just culture war talk anymore.
Right.
I mean, there is some real actual application to the GovCon community. Is there additional things kind of expound on there, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what's interesting is government contractors need to take action, and they need to take action ASAP. I mean, I think we're seeing already enforcement action taking place. I mean, certainly on the federal level. I mean, you now know that OPM has an email address that you can report illegal DEI. Look no further than the Department of Education, where they have a hotline about reporting DEI.
All you need is one disgruntled employee, ex-employee, to make that phone call. Yeah,
absolutely. You saw just recently the EEOC issued letters to 20 national law firms, looking for more information on their DEI programs. I think the most notable development that's happened very recently was on March 19th, so less than 10 days ago. The EEOC and the Department of Justice issued technical assistance, kind of explaining and elaborating, what is illegal DEI, and examples of what it looks like in the workplace. And it's something that I think all government contractors need to take note of. And so I think, one of the things that these technical assistants and this guidance kind of noted was, they defined what is illegal DEI. And so a DEI program essentially is when you have an employer taking an employment action, and they give examples of what an employment action is, when it is motivated, either in whole or in part.
And that's critical.
Motivated, exactly. Motivated in whole or in part on someone's protected class, race, gender, disability. And as Declan noted, motivated is very different than because of. And so it doesn't have to be the exclusive reason. It could just be, hey, if that factored into an employment decision, that can be viewed by this administration and by our agencies that enforce that as illegal DEI.
And the phrase you hear a lot is, the company wants to balance out its workforce. You know what I mean? And while they may not be looking to do quotas, that phrase "balance out their workforce" has come under attack, and that's going to be a problem if you start trying to go down that road in a company.
Yep. And so I think so these technical assistance and these guidance that came out from EEOC and DOJ. So they provided a definition of what is illegal DEI. They also made it very clear that reverse discrimination is discrimination. And so as some background, there's a case that's pending before the Supreme Court right now that's basically challenging whether or not reverse discrimination requires a different standard than your traditional discrimination. The EEOC's position is reverse discrimination is discrimination. And maybe we should talk, what is reverse discrimination, right? And so it's essentially when you have a majority group who's claiming that they are being treated differently. And so like the common example is, Caucasian males.
Middle-aged white males.
Right.
What would we know about that?
Right.
Although maybe you with your fresh face is not so middle-aged. We'll see.
I'm still middle-aged, thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Joe's happy to be in that.
Thank you.
Joe's like hanging on.
Hanging on.
But yeah, reverse discrimination, it's a thing. Reverse discrimination is discrimination. And so the common example is, a Caucasian male claiming that, he wasn't promoted because of some DEI program.
Yeah.
The EEOC made it clear that should be treated the exact same way that discrimination's treated.
And it's not just promotions or hiring or firing, right?
That's right. So the guidance goes on to talk about, obviously whenever you're claiming discrimination, you need to show some harm, some injury, typically adverse employment action. And, your run-of-the-mill is, termination, hiring, firing, demotion, change in pay. What's interesting is this guidance goes on to kind of elaborate on some other things that some people may not think of as adverse employment action.
Yeah.
And we're talking about exclusion from training, exclusion from mentoring, exclusion from fellowships. Here's a big one: exclusion from networking opportunities. I mean,
That is so interesting.
You got to
Yeah.
be careful about,
Yeah.
you know, that the all guys happy hour
Yeah,
or, you
yeah.
know, the women's lunches or what have you.
Yeah.
And so if you're excluding people, and I think the biggest thing too is if they're missing out on opportunities to grow, that's when you're going to have a real problem. But yeah, that guidance really elaborates on what it
A
means.
little broader.
Yeah, much broader.
A
Absolutely.
little broader.
So like how are I mean, it's one government that's a shrinking government right now. How are they going to get inside? How are they going to know that this is happening? What's their hook?
Yeah. So I mean, so we talked about the hotlines. We talked about the reporting. I think the biggest thing is going to come from those certifications,
Okay.
right? And so the certification, what we're talking about is, you know, for all government contractors, when they're certifying, you know, to the government, they now need to certify that they do not maintain any illegal DEI programs or policies. That was part of the challenge that Declan mentioned early on. That was subject to the injunction that has since been lifted. And so you're going to start seeing those certifications show up, if not already.
I was at an event this morning full of government contractors, and there was a show of hands who has seen or received a certification, and surprisingly about a dozen hands went up. I was surprised. Some of them standalone certifications, and some of them in the context of a contract modification, so it was part of maybe an extension or something like that. Those certifications are already coming out.
Absolutely.
And there's a deadline, a date out there, is there not, for
That's right. Yeah,
compliance?
April 20th is the big deadline to kind of keep in mind, and so that's, you know, now is the time to be taking action to kind of make sure that you're not maintaining any of these illegal DEI.
So Declan, I mean, has the Trump administration specifically called out the government contractors as being in the crosshairs for this? I mean, everything obviously is talked about, you know, the agencies, but has there been any specific language from the administration with regards to the contractors?
100%. I mean, we've talked about this before. We've said that, you know, federal contractors, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but they're sort of like the guinea pigs when it comes to things like this, because it's so easy for an administration to get at this group as opposed to purely private sector companies, because they pay them. So they have the purse strings and they have the leverage. So these certifications, it's basically certify that you don't engage in illegal DEI, or you're not going to get paid. So you can take a principled stand all you want, you will be out of business if you do so, you know, if you don't take some action here. So yes, they absolutely are. They've made it clear that they're going to really use the Federal False Claims Act as their hook. If you make a certification and it turns out to be wrong, you end up, you know, you do use DEI, what they would consider to be illegal DEI, that they can come after you under the Federal False Claims Act, which is not just civil monetary liability, it can potentially be criminal liability. And it's gotten even worse because what the OFCCP, which we talked about this in the January roundup, basically we thought that's gone away. There's no longer, that's the one where contractors were required to submit affirmative action plans up until 2 months ago. But now what happened is they've got a new OFCCP head, Catherine Eschbach, and she's basically saying, you know what, we're still alive and kicking here at OFCCP. We don't care about your affirmative action plans right now. Don't submit us to those. We're going to start looking at your old affirmative action plans. This is according to press reports, that we're going to look at the ones that you have filed in prior years. Keep in mind, those were absolutely not only legal to file, they were required in order to be a government contractor.
What I think is interesting is, so it was reported from an internal email, I believe, that was circulated amongst all staff from the new director of the OFCCP. She used the phrase autopsy. We're going to conduct an autopsy on all affirmative action plans to ensure, you know, that there's no illegal DEI.
Like DEI is DOA. Yes. Now we're starting to use
no
use the
DEI
language.
when we had to report what we were doing to you.
So yes, I mean, I think you're going to see, you know, you may see some more audits. You know, I think the fact that this is something that came out within, I think, the first week of her assuming office, it's consistent with what you're seeing over at the EEOC with the appointment of Andrea Lucas. In her opening press release, she said, you know, one of my top priorities is investigating illegal DEI. You're seeing it across the agencies now, and now OFCCP is kind of following suit, and they're going to be looking at old affirmative action plans.
Yeah, I think our friends at Berkshire, our great sponsor, they are going to be busy. I mean, I think in some respects they're going to be quite busy, you know, in this area of trying to figure out what are contractor potential liability for filing affirmative action plans that they actually were required to in order to be government contractors up until 2 to 3 months ago.
And one other thing, when we were talking about enforcement and kind of just showing how serious this administration is, one thing that's kind of gotten, I don't want to say forgotten, but people aren't really talking about it, is when that original executive order came out, there were a number of components to it. I think the False Claims Act certainly got the most attention.
Yeah.
There's also the directive in that executive order basically having the heads of agency identify the top 9 most egregious offenders of DEI. And so, you've got this quota, so to speak, of, identifying companies. I think that's set to be released in the coming months. It's coming up.
They didn't go just straight to the top 10 list. They went top 9.
They went top 9, exactly. Yeah,
I've always tried to figure out what the significance of that is.
But yeah, so I mean, so that work is underway. They're preparing a report to the heads of each agency. And so, I think you're seeing it at the EEOC, you're seeing it at OFCCP. It's just going to kind of continue with these investigations.
So with all that said, Nick, so what should our GovCons be doing right now with regards to DEI? What are the actions they should be taking?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, if you haven't already done it, you need to do a DEI risk audit. And that kind of really is a comprehensive review of your employment practice. Obviously, taking a look at your handbook, doing a privileged DEI assessment is something that you need to do. But you need to go much broader than that. You need to look at your websites. You need to look at your job postings. You need to look at, your job applications. I think you also just need to look internally how you operate. What is it that you consider when you're interviewing people, when you're hiring people? Do you have employee resource groups? When you talk about, internal mentorship programs, is this something that's kind of open to everyone, or are you excluding people? And it could be subconsciously. And so, you really need to look much broader than just your handbook, because I think, what we're seeing is these audits are coming. And you want to make sure that you've done your homework now. I don't want to sit here and say that the words DEI or diversity or equity are per se illegal. And so you hear of some companies, clients just kind of purging that word. It's not per se illegal, but I think it should be a shift in focus from diversity to inclusion. I think inclusion's got to be your most important priority.
So you mentioned employee resource groups, and actually we have a question come in exactly on the term, and somebody said, if we have an employee resource group, ERG, for groups like working mothers, LGBTQ employees, do we need to disband them, or what if we just open them up to everyone? What's the step forward in those situations?
It's a good question. So I think, from my perspective, I think if those ERGs explicitly exclude others, it's going to be problematic under this administration. And what I would find it problematic is, if in these ERGs you're seeing people use those as a vehicle to advance within an organization, get promoted, get a pay increase, get more opportunities, get better work assignments, and people are being excluded, that's going to be problematic.
So, and I've heard people say, well, fine, we'll just open them up to everybody. But I just, we've talked about this internally here, Nick. I just don't think that that's a quick, easy fix, because if the content and the subject matter of those group meetings are still the same, somebody's going to say, sure, they let me in the door. But when I got there, I felt really, really awkward, excluded, and I felt like the content of it made me feel a little bit under attack, and therefore I feel that was unlawful DEI. So
it's tricky. I mean, if you're not feeling welcome in a group that's sponsored by your employer because of some protected class, even if it's a class that's the majority, that could be problematic as well. So I think you're right. There's not one size fits all for all of this.
And the hardest thing is to take drastic, to send an email out and saying, as of today, no more of these resource groups. They're all banned. They're all going away. You also got to think about the reality of your workforce. Your culture just went down the tubes. And so I think it's got to be a little bit more of a I hate hate to say wait and see approach, but I think what you would do as the company is to say, look, let's take this stuff, let's maybe pause things and do a comprehensive review to make sure that while we are encouraging people to advance themselves professionally, we're not doing it at the excuse of other groups. And and so pause it for maybe a couple of months, because right now we're right hot and heavy in the crosshairs. Yeah.
And Joe, you were asking about what companies can do now. I mean, I think given the stated priorities, and I think it's safe to assume anticipated enforcement that we're going to see from OFCCP, it's in your best interest to take a look at your prior affirmative action plans. Take a look at what was submitted, so that you kind of have an idea of what may happen if there is an audit. And I think another thing to kind of consider is as you're updating and reviewing and kind of considering what you need to change as it relates to these DEI audits, an internal memo's not a bad idea. I think identifying your thought process, your commitment, to EEO,
memorialize things.
Exactly, because I think if the day comes 6 months, a year from now, where there is an audit, it'd be helpful to have an internal memo that says, okay, here's why we did what we did, just to kind of explain your rationale.
It's almost like a timestamp document, like a timestamp document, because here's what's going to happen. You need to do a DEI risk audit, but you're going to miss something. Somebody's going to have a version of your handbook that is not the latest and greatest that's been scrubbed of DEI stuff, and they're going to use that. And then if the government comes knocking, you're going to feel sort of flat-footed and already sort of on the defense. If they're showing you stuff, maybe an old version of your website, and you're trying to say, oh yeah, but we did that. I think you're right, Nick. What you need to do is you need to do an internal memo. We're not talking about necessarily about something disseminated to staff, but really just saying, here is our current view. We are fully in favor of equal opportunity for everyone. Everyone gets a fair shake. Nobody gets a leg up at the expense of somebody else. And if the government does come knocking, you say, you want to know what we think? And you can pull stuff from all over places. Here's what we think right here. And listen, this is going to be a bit of a numbers game for the government. They're not going to be able to go after everyone. If you do that, I think you're ahead of the curve. And I think they may then move on to the next one.
I like that idea. And I think, too, the other thing to note is, while it's probably a good idea to have this centralized and kind of run through HR and hopefully with the assistance of outside counsel, I think you also need to think broader, just kind of in terms of, talk to your recruitment managers, talk to the people who are conducting interviews. I mean, I think back to, you remember not too long ago, where companies were blasted, where, they would post a picture of their leadership or their managers, and, they would be blasted because it was all male or, all one race. And then you would have this knee-jerk reaction where that company would say, you know what, we need more females in leadership. We need more diversity in our management. And so, you need to make sure that the people that are making those hiring decisions are not letting that factor in, because the reality is, if that happens, that's going to be considered illegal DEI with this administration.
Yeah, 100%.
So with our remaining time, let's maybe try and hit a couple other topics that are obviously front and center as well. So obviously we have the agency funding cuts, and our clients have been laser focused on the cuts since DOGE went into overdrive. Where do we see at the present time in terms of agencies where the most cuts are happening?
We spent the February roundup talking about, I think we called it like furloughs and funding cuts and stuff. And so we gave, we talked about a lot of these issues. And so I think what we wanted to do is maybe just update, where are we seeing those cuts right now? Obviously defense spending is still being untouched, or frankly, sometimes being increased, at least at its core function of national security. The agencies right now, science, these are the industries: science, health, education, of course, transportation. These are all seeing cuts. What's interesting also, though, is consulting services, and that goes across all of these industries. The administration and DOGE really seems laser focused on what they call consulting services, and it's largely the large sort of behemoth consulting companies that we've talked about before, and they've asked them to justify what they do. And here's the guidance that DOGE gave to the largest consulting firms. They are required to justify what they do, and it says, a 15-year-old should be able to understand, this is a quote, a 15-year-old should be able to understand what service you provide provide and why it is important. No consultative jargon or gobbledygook. So, I mean,
It's a technical term.
I'm telling you, I'm thinking.
That's a technical
I mean,
term.
I'm thinking maybe they want a TikTok video of what you do. I don't know what they want. A 15-year-old, you know? I mean, do they even use the periods and commas anymore? So they're coming after them hard. They are definitely coming after consulting firms. They also want to know, and this is another quote, GSA is asking consulting firms to detail how pricing is structured for each contract, project, or category, explain any pricing differences between agencies, and how these pricing structures compare to market information in your possession. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, says that he believes consulting firms, he said this over the weekend, are like a boa constrictor around federal spending programs. So if you are in consulting for the federal government, just know there's a bigger target on your back right now, and you've got to really get ahead of this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you're starting to see that now. I mean, just a number, of our clients, local government contractors, you're starting to see those cuts happen. You're starting to see these companies have to do group layoff, mass layoffs, kind of go through that WARN Act exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually question here.
We had another live question we want to address. So somebody asked, what will the OFCCP be looking for in the previous affirmative action plans?
It remains to be seen, but remember, you were supposed to show your affirmative efforts to recruit and hire women, minorities, which now this administration just says that's flat out discrimination. And they say it's discrimination that was illegal well before this current Trump administration. So that's their view of it. That's part of it. They have not necessarily specified exactly what it is. This could be a threat. Again, it has not been publicly pronounced. I think the Wall Street Journal was reporting on it from, I think you said an internal email or something like that. So, it's a good question, but there's nothing you can do about it right now. But I would say I would take a look at those under the lens of what this administration believes in terms of what is illegal DEI, just so that you're not caught flat-footed, that you maybe can explain what you did back then.
Yeah. Looks like we have another question on layoffs. Yeah.
Question number 2, yeah.
Yeah, so other question, and again, thanks to the audience out there. If we laid off an employee, but due to a reversal, these did happen, by the agency, we want to bring the employee back. Do we need to restart the clock on the employee relationship and do a new onboarding?
Oh,
yeah,
this is
it's a tricky one. I mean,
the tough job of HR right now.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, this kind of goes to the decision whether or not to furlough or terminate. And so I think, when you're weighing those options in terms of, do we permanently terminate somebody, or do we kind of go with the temporary option of a furlough? I think, your first obligation is to get a sense from your contracting officer how permanent this is. I mean, we're seeing exactly what happened in this question where, there's cuts, but then, maybe a month or so later, the government says, you know what, we're back, we want everyone back. And so I think you really need to kind of get a sense from your contracting officer, hey, is this something that you see as permanent and not coming back? And if that's the case, maybe then it's a term.
Yeah.
But if you get a sense that, hey, we're going to kind of see what happens, we've got some arguments, we're pushing back on this, maybe do a temporary furlough.
Yeah, it has real world consequences for HR out there. I mean, if you think about just all of the stuff, PTO, let's just say you have a probationary period or introductory period where somebody's not allowed to use paid time off, 60, 90 days. Do you put that employee who was an employee and then wasn't for 30 days and now is back on? What if they have an FMLA qualifying need? Do they satisfy the 12 months and 1,250 hours, even though there's that gap of 1 month? I mean, again, we're not here to offer necessarily the answers. I wish we could, but
it's a tough one. Because what do you do if that person, they've been out of work for, let's just say, a month, maybe longer. They filed for unemployment. They receive state benefits as part of this termination. Then they want to bring them back. Do you look back to their prior employment?
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, no doubt. Another question.
Another question coming in.
We might go overtime here today, guys.
Being typed as it's coming in. So, should companies continue to collect race gender data in order to analyze selection and compliance with the EEO laws?
Yeah, so this is a great question because it's two different things. One is collection of this data. And of course, many contractors out there still have their EEO-1 filings that they have to do. That is data-driven. That is collection of data. Affirmative action plans by the OFCCP was I'm taking affirmative action to hire more women. I'm taking affirmative action to hire more blacks in these jobs. This is more collecting the data in order to analyze it. And keep in mind, discrimination is still unlawful. And remember, you've got a lot of state laws that come into play. So if you get hit with the discrimination law, you can't just say, well, wait a second. Our defense is that this stuff really doesn't matter anymore, because that ain't going to work at all. So you really do, internally at least, want to have a good handle on where you stand with regard to your workforce and what it looks like. You can't change it, but you should know.
Yeah, EEO is certainly alive and well.
Yeah.
Nothing in these executive orders changes equal employment opportunity. Protected classes still remain. EEOC is still very much a thing, and I would actually say very active at this day and age. And so, these executive orders do not change EEO at all.
All right, lightning round.
Lightning round. Okay, we are at time. We had a topic here we've run out of time on, but does anybody want to make any comments about the EEO with regards to the GSA?
Moving everything
and
over.
moving over to GSA.
I will say that
it
is a trend that everything's being consolidated. So in a nutshell, there were some new executive orders that basically moved everything that is looking to move IT technology type contracts over to GSA. Right now, they largely are done agency by agency. And the same thing goes for payment of those. Another executive order said payments are all going to come centralized from Treasury. Where I see this coming into play is payments are probably not going to be perhaps as timely, at least in the short run, while they do this consolidation. Yeah. And oh my goodness, having everything go through GSA, so many contracts. I can't imagine, the protest backlog, the contracting backlog, this end of fiscal year on September 30th, 2025 is going to be a show.
And it's no shocker that because of that anticipated headache that's about to come, they do give GSA the opportunity to opt in or opt out, to basically decline whether they want to keep it on the agency level. There's apparently supposed to be a comprehensive plan coming out as part of this executive order that GSA should be rolling out. And so stay tuned for that. That should be coming out, I think, the next 60 or 90 days.
And September's right around the corner. They are trying to use AI as part of this process to help them, but it is a very much a work in progress. So we'll continue to monitor this.
Well, it sounds like we're going to not have any trouble finding topics from month to month between now and September. Speaking of next month, as we wrap up here, again, thanks to everybody for joining us. I want to thank Nick for stepping in and joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I think he passed. Seth's out there walking the floors, worrying about his future.
He might be sweating.
He may be sweating. But for next month, we're going to be back on our normal third Thursday schedule for next month. Currently, we are planning to talk about severance and separation agreements, again, in line with some of the topics today. We do reserve the right, based on what happens between now and then, to switch topics and try and remain timely and try and provide you guys with timely, important information. A lot to cover today. To our HR warriors out there, as I said, remain vigilant. We wish you all the best, and always feel free to reach out to our experts here if they can support you in any way. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month.